So I was playing PvE on the next patch, 13.13, and I played against this Jinx comp which completely obliterated my board. And I was completely shocked at how powerful this Jinx was even at 2-star and how often it casted. So I decided to look into this comp, and what I found has the potential to completely dominate the next patch, as this patch on PvE has already been locked in and is the version that will be pushed to live. What I found shows that this Jinx needs to be hotfixed as soon as possible. In this video, I'll take you through the issues, explain why it's so powerful, and propose a few potential nerfs that should address the problem. So let's get started. Okay, so as we can see in this footage, Jinx has no downtime whatsoever, and this triple Shojin both gives her full starting mana and allows her to ult after ult after ult without the need to auto at all. Shojin was buffed in this patch to give double the amount of starting mana, so 3 Shojins amounts to 90 starting mana, which is more than enough for Jinx's first cast. But why is Jinx gaining mana during her cast? Well, if you watched my video on what can stack Titans, then you know that some ults in TFT can count as autos and can proc items like Shiv, Shojin, Titans, etc. But during a unit's ult, only every second instance of damage will count as an auto, which prevents these items from stacking an obscene amount during a single ult. So with 3 Shojins, Jinx is generating 25 mana per auto. But there are only 5 instances of damage during her ult, so why is she generating 75 mana? Well, that means that even though Jinx technically autos 2.5 times during her ult, the game is recognizing that as 3 full autos and thus grants her 75 mana. Now, I would have thought that the game should have rounded 2.5 down and interpret this as only 2 autos, but the fact that Jinx can repeatedly chain ult directly disproves that. Although this could be a bug, as this interaction definitely seems unintended. Anyway, just by itself, these Shojins on Jinx can seem a little redundant, as she doesn't have items like Last Whisper or Infinity Edge to capitalize on her ult's damage or to reduce the armor of the enemy units. But that's where Zorn comes in, and specifically the virulent Bioware Chem mod. With this mod, Jinx will constantly be applying the Plague and causing many enemy units to take a lot more damage. And Jinx can apply this extremely well, as not only is she constantly ulting, but she's also firing them randomly around her target, and so her application of this Plague can cover a much larger area. This can easily hit the enemy carry and burst them down. But I'm not sure if Virulent is stacking on itself, but the damage definitely seems way too high for it to not be stacking. In many rounds, I had a Jinx 2 outdamage a bel'veth 2. Anyway, I tried this Jinx with other chem mods, but it didn't feel nearly as impactful and powerful as the Virulent mod. And I tried different versions of Jinx comps, one where you reroll Jinx, one where you play Jinx 2 and go into the standard Zeri comp, and one where you play Bastion and spam Lockets. I found that the Bastion and Zeri comps performed a lot better because this Jinx with the Virulent Bioware mod is more of a supportive unit than a damage unit. With this Virulent Jinx, having multiple damage sources is generally better, as all of the damage added and then multiplied together will melt everything. And playing units like Heimer and Zeri can be very important, especially when you don't have any armor shred, which is insanely crucial, as otherwise Jinx will just get stuck on frontline. I found that Jinx 2 already did more than enough damage and virulent application, so a setup with other units like Zeri and bel'veth just cleaned up all the enemy units. Honestly, 3-star Jinx is not necessary at all and is too risky to roll for when there are other units that can synergize extremely well with the Plague damage bonus. And I feel as though the difference between 2 and 4 Gunner is much larger than the difference between Jinx 2 and 3-star. Also, this Jinx just needs 3 Shojins and Virulent to function. She doesn't need anything else like Zeke's Herald. In fact, I think Zeke's is bad as it doesn't speed up her ult animation, so these items would be better used on other units. And I believe that Jinx's ult has unlimited range, so you can just trap her in a corner to keep her safe and have her beam down the entire enemy board. Now, I assume that many of you have already come across this comp before, as it has completely dominated the first patch of set 9 and cemented itself as the best comp in this patch. While there are nerfs coming to this comp in 13.13, specifically targeted towards Zeri, there are no Gunner nerfs, no Sejuani nerfs, and no Urgot nerfs. So this comp will still be extremely strong going into the next patch, and I believe it will dominate the patch again, especially with this iteration of Jinx. but I've noticed recently that Bastion has become increasingly popular as a frontline in both the current patch and the next patch on PvE. And this frontline is very powerful and tanky at higher breakpoints of Bastion, and this is especially the case when players utilize stacking multiple lockets on the Bastions. The shield is extremely difficult to get through as it factors in the unit's resistances and tankiness. With Bastion, it's even more tanky as their resistances are doubled for the first 10 seconds of combat, which buys loads of time for a backline Rageblade user to stack and scale up. These Bastion locket comps will probably become very prevalent in 13.13, especially as Slayer is getting huge buffs, but is hard countered by these Bastion comps as Slayers will struggle to get the second half of their bonus as these shields will keep the enemy units above the threshold. So with both these Bastion comps and the Zeri comp, there's a lot of boards that can utilize this virulent Jinx very well, and that is especially true when your first Zorn item is virulent, as all you need to do is just play Zeri and Jinx and the rest of your board can be anything. There is only one legend that can enable this comp, and that is Twisted Fate, as he can guarantee Pandora's box and provide extra items. Without TF, there is no reliable way of getting 3 Shojins and not completely ruining your item economy and itemizations for other units. For example, you will likely need to make sure your frontline is beefy enough to buy time for Jinx and Zeri to scale, and you may need to give Zeri a last whisper if you don't have any other source of shred. In terms of the other augments, while combat augments like Jeweled Lotus or Combat Caster add a lot to Jinx's power, I honestly think they're bait with this comp and you should just stick to the Twisted Fate augments. And that's because your other items will be severely lacking due to investing so heavily into Jinx, and you may not have enough frontline or secondary carry potential. Taking combat augments around Jinx is a massive risk and you may not have enough damage sources to fully utilize the effect of Virulent Bioware. If you take Twisted Fate's item augments, then you can have multiple itemized carries that can completely destroy the enemy board. And you don't need to really worry about frontline, as all you need are several lockets to buy enough time for your carries to do this. And this is kind of funny because now we've gone from spamming Zeeks in the last patch to now spamming Shojins and lockets. Anyway, with Pandora's, it's not that difficult to go Vertical Zorn or Bastion with this Jinx, as you can use Pandora's box to reroll any emblems you get into Zorn or Bastion emblems, which also enables other things like Chemtech Jarvan or Bastion bel'veth. With these item augments and units like Zeri or Heimer, you can avoid the risk of falling off due to the lack of damage. This Jinx too will dominate the early and mid game very easily, and your only concern is getting outscaled by players with several combat augments, as you only have item augments. Jinx needs to be nerfed, as her current state completely bypasses the need for attack speed, as she is just chain ulting and won't stop until she is stunned or mana reaved. And I'm not sure, but I believe that since Jinx's attack speed during her ult is fixed, she isn't affected by things like Eternal Winter or Chill at all, although she will get stunned by Eternal Winter when she hits max Chill stacks. So Riot should probably reduce the number of her rockets or increase her mana cost. If it's indeed a bug that her ult is counting as 3 autos instead of 2, then fixing that bug should be enough. This would force Jinx to have some downtime between her ults and force her to auto, which would considerably decrease her damage per second. The main thing holding this Jinx comp back is how few items you may get in a game overall, but you can easily overcome that with Twisted Fate's augments or even some portals. This comp is extremely strong when you have several itemized carries like Zeri, Urgot or bel'veth who already output an extremely large amount of damage. And stacking several lockets allows you to greed your itemization even more so, as the shield power and tankiness locket grants is obscene, especially when stacked on Bastion boards. This patch is already locked in and will ship on Wednesday, and this problem can't be fixed unless Riot hotfix Jinx, which I hope they do. I also wonder if Locket will need any adjustments because these Bastion Locket comps are extremely tanky. And with Akshan also getting the same change or buff that Jinx did in this patch, there could be a build similar to this for Akshan, although his mana cost is 90 and not 75. But yeah, now I'll leave some questions with you guys. What do you think about this Jinx comp? Am I overreacting, or will it completely take over the next patch? Are you going to play it or avoid it at all costs? Let me know in the comments and remember to subscribe. Anyway, check out these other videos if you want to see more from me, and as always, thank you for watching and I'll catch you in the next one.